Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Crime Files USA. Here, we bring you the most terrifying, real, and shocking crime stories. Stories that will send chills down your spine. If you're into mysterious cases, serial killers, and unsolved crimes, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon, Juju, so you never miss any new video. Let's dive into today's dark and chilling story.
It is the night of July 10th, 2024. Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, one of the most iconic landmarks in England, stands over a gorge 76 metres above the River Avon. Thousands cross it every day. Tonight, something is wrong. A man dressed all in black is struggling. Two large suitcases, both visibly heavy, are proving almost impossible to move. The wheels on one of them are already broken. And then, something catches the eye of a passing cyclist. A dark liquid seeping through the seams of the luggage, dripping onto the bridge's walkway. The cyclist, equipped with a GoPro camera on his helmet, approaches the man and speaks to him in Spanish. The man replies, distressed, nervous. "You don't believe what they do to me," he says in Spanish. Within minutes, a 999 call is placed. Police are on their way, but the man in black has already vanished into the Bristol night, leaving the suitcases behind. What officers found inside those suitcases would shock Britain, and what they discovered 2 days later, inside a quiet flat in West London, would be even worse. Albert Alfonso was 62 years old. By all accounts, a hard-working man. His civil partner, Paul Longworth, was 71, a retired handyman. The two lived together in a comfortable flat on Scott's Road in Shepherd's Bush, West London. Neighbours thought well of them. Friends described them as a settled, affectionate couple. Paul was said to be in poor health. Albert looked after him. Albert had an active personal life beyond the walls of their home. He filmed himself with sexual partners, he used adult websites, and it was through one of those platforms, sometime in early 2024, that he encountered a Colombian man named Justin Andres Mosquera. Mosquera was a pornographic performer based in Colombia. The relationship that developed between him and Alfonso was, in the words of the sentencing judge, transactional, legal and consensual, but built on financial exchange. Alfonso paid Mosquera for his time and companionship. At some point, the connection deepened, or at least Alfonso believed it did. He and Paul even traveled to Colombia to meet Mosquera in person. And then came the invitation that would prove fatal. Alfonso asked Mosquera to visit London. Mosquera arrived in the UK earlier in 2024 for what was described as a first visit. Then, in June 2024, he came again. This second visit was funded by Alfonso. Court records show Alfonso paid for a trip to Brighton, gym membership for Mosquera, English language lessons, and nights out around London. It was, by all appearances, a generous invitation extended in good faith. But behind the Brighton day trips and language classes, something very different was taking shape inside Justin Mosquera's mind. Prosecutors at Woolwich Crown Court would later describe to the jury what Mosquera was doing on his laptop and phone during those weeks in June and early July 2024. What emerged was not the behaviour of a man enjoying London as a tourist. It was the calculated research of someone planning to kill. June 18th, 2024. Mosquera, searches online for information about buying a chest freezer. He is staying in the flat. He is sleeping under the same roof as Albert and Paul. And already he is researching how to buy a large appliance, one capable of storing bodies. June 27th. He steals Albert Alfonso's bank details, the man who invited him to London, who paid for his gym and his language lessons, whose home he is sleeping in. Mosquera is photographing or copying his banking information. July 4th. He translates phrases from Spanish to English, phrases needed to arrange the delivery of the chest freezer to the flat. July 8th. He searches online for where to hit someone on the head to kill them. Let that sit for a moment. 4 days before the murders, Justin Mosquera was researching the exact point on the human skull that would cause death if struck. The judge would later point to one more piece of digital evidence. Mosquera had also researched the value of the Scots Road property, the flat belonging to Albert and Paul. Prosecutors argued that Mosquera's goal was financial. He intended to inherit, steal, or benefit from the deaths of both men. In the court's view, that made these killings murders for gain. At trial, Mosquera offered a very different account. He claimed Alfonso had abused him, groomed him, and threatened his family back in Colombia. He admitted killing Alfonso, but framed it as a loss of control, a reaction to sustained coercion. He claimed Alfonso had already killed Paul Longworth himself before Mosquera intervened. The jury rejected this. So did the judge, categorically. The digital searches, the freezer, the stolen bank details, the property valuations. None of it fit the narrative of a frightened man acting in the heat of passion. It fit the narrative of a predator who had planned everything in advance. July 8th, 2024. Around midday, Paul Longworth, 71 years old, in poor health, retired, is killed inside the flat on Scots Road. The judge's sentencing remarks indicate he was struck with a hammer. His body is then hidden under the bed. Paul Longworth was a vulnerable man. He relied on Albert. He had no reason to suspect that the Colombian guest sleeping in their home had researched how to kill him. He had no warning. That evening, around 10 o'clock, Albert Alfonso is killed. The circumstances of his death are among the most disturbing aspects of this case. Albert was killed during a sexual encounter, one that he himself had arranged to film. There were 2 cameras running inside the flat. The entire incident was recorded. That footage was later played to the jury at Woolwich Crown Court. Prosecutors used it as their most powerful piece of evidence, proof that whatever Mosquera would later claim about fear or coercion, the reality of that night was something else entirely. Within the space of roughly 10 hours, both Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth were dead. 2 men. A settled couple, killed in their own home. What Mosquera did in the hours and days that followed the murders tells us everything about the level of premeditation involved. First, he attempted to access money. He tried to transfer funds from the victims' bank accounts. He also used their bank cards successfully, withdrawing several £100s in cash. Then, he sent messages impersonating Albert Alfonso to Alfonso's workplace, to contacts, creating the impression that Alfonso was still alive and well. And then came the chest freezer, the one he had researched buying weeks earlier. It was forced into a doorway inside the flat. The bodies of Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth were dismembered. Their heads were kept in the freezer. This is one of the most disturbing details of the entire case. The freezer wasn't an improvised solution. It had been planned, researched on June 18th, ordered through translated phrases on July 4th, delivered and used exactly as Mosquera had intended. The remaining body parts, the torsos, were packed into large suitcases. Mosquera now needed to dispose of them. He needed a place remote enough, dramatic enough, final enough. He chose Clifton Suspension Bridge. To get from Shepherd's Bush to Bristol, Mosquera needed help. He couldn't carry two enormous, blood-soaked suitcases on public transport. He arranged a private hire, a red van. The driver, not knowing what he was transporting, picked Mosquera up from Scott's Road and drove him to Bristol. He was paid in cash. That red van would become what police later called the golden nugget of the investigation. Its distinctive colour made it memorable. CCTV footage captured it. Investigators traced the number plate, and that number plate led them back, directly, to the flat on Scott's Road. But that came later. First came the bridge. Mosquera arrived at Clifton Suspension Bridge in the dark, dragging the two suitcases. One of them already had broken wheels. The weight was extraordinary. And then the bleeding started. Dark fluid began leaking from the luggage, dripping onto the walkway. A cyclist came past. He had a GoPro running on his helmet, recording everything. He stopped, spoke to the man in Spanish. Mosquera replied, "You don't believe what they do to me." The cyclist's suspicions were already raised. Other witnesses nearby noticed the blood. A 999 call was made. Police were on their way. Mosquera fled, abandoning both suitcases on the bridge. Security staff and bystanders confirmed his presence. The GoPro footage gave investigators freeze-frame images of his face. When police opened the suitcases, they found human remains, 2 torsos. A major investigation was now underway, but it was initially focused on Bristol, and there was a complication. The phone belonging to Albert Alfonso appeared to still be active and moving around London. Someone was using it to maintain the illusion that he was alive. Police did not immediately search the Scott's Road flat. The image from the GoPro footage circulated rapidly. Within hours, Mosquera was described as one of the most photographed wanted men in Britain. His face was everywhere. News broadcasts, social media, newspaper front pages. His phone was switched off. He seemed to have disappeared. Bristol was swarming with police. The Met coordinated with Avon and Somerset police, but Mosquera had vanished into the city. Then, he made a mistake. He turned his phone back on. The moment he did, his device pinged off cell towers. Investigators triangulated his location. He was in central Bristol, walking through the city during a busy weekend, apparently in plain sight. Remarkably, despite his face being on every screen in Britain, no member of the public reported seeing him in those 48 hours. On July 13th, 2024, 3 days after the bridge, police arrested Justin Andres Mosquera near Bristol Temple Meads railway station. Around the same time, investigators finally entered the flat on Scott's Road. What they found would be described by everyone who encountered it as extraordinarily disturbing. The chest freezer, the heads, the evidence of dismemberment throughout the flat. 2 men, who had lived quietly in that apartment, who had been thought well of by their neighbours, reduced to this. The red van, once traced, confirmed everything. The driver had picked Mosquera up from Scott's Road. That address connected the suitcases in Bristol directly to the horror inside the West London flat. Justin Mosquera went on trial at Woolwich Crown Court in June and July 2025. He did not deny being present. He did not deny that both men died. He admitted, in fact, to killing Albert Alfonso, but claimed it was manslaughter, the result of a loss of control, driven by fear. He alleged that Alfonso had groomed him, manipulated him, and held coercive power over him through threats against his family. He claimed that Alfonso, not him, had killed Paul Longworth. It was a bold defense strategy, and it fell apart under the weight of the digital evidence. Prosecutor Deanna Heer presented the jury with a methodical chronology. The freezer searches on June 18th, weeks before the murders. The stolen bank details on June 27th. The translated phrases for the delivery. The property valuation searches. And the most damning of all, searching on July 8th, the very day of the killings, for where to hit someone on the head to kill them. Then there was the footage. The cameras inside the flat had recorded Albert Alfonso's death. The jury watched it. Whatever Mosquera's claims about fear or coercion, what those cameras showed was something the defense narrative could not easily explain away. On July 21st, 2025, after deliberating, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty of both murders. On October 24th, 2025, Judge Joel Benathan sentenced Justin Andres Mosquera at Woolwich Crown Court. The judge was thorough and unsparing in his remarks. He outlined the aggravating factors: murder for financial gain, 2 victims, significant premeditation and planning, the dismemberment of the bodies, the vulnerability of Paul Longworth, a 71-year-old man in poor health, the exploitation of Albert Alfonso's trust and generosity. He explicitly rejected the defense's claims that Alfonso had groomed or coerced Mosquera. There was an economic imbalance in the relationship. Alfonso paid Mosquera. But the judge described this as motive, not mitigation. Mosquera had created and run websites in Colombia and was not, the judge concluded, a naive or powerless figure. Psychiatric experts Bernard Chin and Norma Estrada had assessed Mosquera and noted personality traits recorded during clinical evaluation. Capable of being charming and charismatic, prone to boredom, sometimes dishonest, with features consistent with self-centeredness and a lack of empathy. No mental health condition was found to amount to mitigation. The judge did note one element from Mosquera's account of his childhood. He described witnessing severe violence as a young child in Colombia, including witnessing killings of other children around the ages of 10 and 14. The experts observed this may have shaped his relationship with violence. It was not treated as mitigation, but it was noted. The sentence: life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 42 years before any possibility of parole. The judge declined to impose a whole life order, citing Mosquera's lack of prior convictions and the limited mitigation around his childhood experiences, but made clear that 42 years meant he would be an old man, at the very earliest, before he could be considered for release. As a Colombian national, he faces deportation in the event he is ever released. Separately, Mosquera pleaded guilty to 3 counts of possessing indecent images of children and received an additional sentence for those offences. For Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth, 2 men who deserved to grow old together in their West London flat, there will be no justice that fully repairs what was taken from them. But the law has spoken, and Justin Mosquera will spend the rest of his productive life behind bars. Cases like this one invariably prompt a question that the courtroom itself cannot fully answer. Who, psychologically, is capable of doing something like this? The sentencing remarks in this case give us a rare window. Psychiatric experts assessed Mosquera and their findings, though not rising to the level of a formal diagnosis that would constitute mitigation, paint a portrait worth examining carefully. The clinicians noted several traits: charm and charisma, a tendency toward boredom, dishonesty, self-centeredness, and a lack of empathy. Together, these features align with what researchers and clinicians identify as dark triad personality traits, specifically the cluster associated with psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder. Charm is frequently misunderstood as incompatible with violence. In reality, it is one of the most consistent features found in individuals capable of sustained predatory behavior. Charm allows someone to establish proximity to victims, to be invited into homes, trusted with access, treated as a friend. For Mosquera, the charm was instrumental. It allowed him to maintain a relationship with Alfonso over months, to be brought to London twice, to live inside the flat of the men he would kill. The lack of empathy is perhaps the most sometime in early 2024. For ordinary people, he encountered the act of planning to kill someone they know, someone who has shown them kindness. Mosquera was a pornographic performer based in Colombia. The emotional barriers, the relationship that developed between him and Alfonso appears to have experienced, in the words of the sentencing judge, transactional. He sat across from Albert Alfonso consensual, dinner, but accepted his financial exchange, went to Brighton with Alfonso paid Mosquera and simultaneously researched how to fracture his skull. At some point, the connection Mosquera described witnessing, or at least extreme violence, as a child in Colombia. He and Paul even travelled to Colombia other children to meet Mosquera in person. The court's psychiatrists noted this may have shaped how Mosquera related to violence. It is worth taking seriously, not as an excuse, which the court firmly declined to do, but as an explanatory factor. A child who witnesses murder does not simply process it and move on. The brain, particularly in early development, is shaped by its environment. Repeated exposure to violence without adult processing or intervention can alter how a person calibrates threat, normalizes harm, and relates to the suffering of others. But, and this is critical, many people survive horrific childhoods without ever harming anyone. Trauma does not determine destiny. What it can do is interact with pre-existing personality vulnerabilities in ways that make violence more conceivable, more available as a solution. In Mosquera's case, the combination of those traits, low empathy, self-centeredness, dishonesty, instrumentalized charm, with a childhood marinated in violence, may have produced someone for whom killing felt, on some level, like a viable option. What distinguishes this case psychologically from crimes of passion is the extended, methodical nature of the planning. A loss of control, the defense Mosquera attempted, is spontaneous. It leaves no digital footprint. It does not involve researching freezers 3 weeks in advance. The timeline of Mosquera's preparation, June 18th, June 27th, July 4th, July 8th, reveals a mind operating in what psychologists call an instrumental mode. Goal-directed, calculating, emotionally detached from the human consequences of the plan. Each step was a means to an end. The end was money. The means were 2 human beings. This is one of the clearest markers of predatory rather than reactive violence. Reactive violence is emotional, impulsive, often regretted. Predatory violence is cold, considered, and carried out with the same cognitive processes one might use to plan a business venture. The fact that Mosquera continued to maintain his composure, impersonating Alfonso, accessing bank accounts, arranging transport to Bristol, after the murders, suggests a compartmentalization of affect that is deeply atypical. The court's conclusion that these were murders for financial gain fits a well-documented psychological pattern. Instrumental homicide, driven by material acquisition. In such cases, the victims are not primarily hated. They are obstacles or resources. Their deaths are, to the perpetrator's mind, a transaction. Mosquera appears to have viewed Alfonso's property, bank accounts, and financial access as things to be obtained, and Alfonso and Paul as problems to be removed in order to obtain them. This dehumanizing calculus, people as means, not ends, is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the psychological picture. Albert Alfonso showed Mosquera genuine generosity. He took him to Brighton, paid for his gym, his lessons, his nights out, and Mosquera received all of that while, simultaneously, planning to take everything else. Cases like Jostin Mosquera's resist easy categorization. He was not a spontaneous killer. He was not a mentally ill man who lost contact with reality. He was, by all the evidence available to us, a man who decided, deliberately, over weeks, that 2 human lives were worth less than whatever financial gain he might extract from ending them. Understanding that is not the same as excusing it, but it matters. It matters because Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth trusted someone. That trust was exploited with patience, precision, and complete indifference to their humanity. They deserved better. And the only comfort, if there is one, is that the evidence they unknowingly left behind, the cameras, the laptop searches, the GoPro on a cyclist's helmet, told their story clearly enough that justice, in the end, was served.